Well, what's up, everyone? Nice to see you all, or your names virtually. I hope you're all staying healthy and safe in this kind of crazy time. So, if you don't know me, I'm Jordan. I'm a co-president of MEMCO. I'm stoked to be introducing Jon today. Jon Sax is a booking agent at Liaison Artists, which is an independent boutique booking agency in San Francisco. Liaison represents some of the biggest names in house and techno today. Artists you may know like Kevin Saunderson, Robert Hood, Ben UFO, Anna, Koyu, Panpot, DJ Stingray, Pleasurecraft, Buka Shade, Joy Orbison, Mallgrab, Tale of Us, and Randomer, just to name a few. Jon attended U of M for undergrad, and he was the president of MEMCO back when it was called MEDMA, the Michigan Electronic Dance Music Association, and that was from 2007 to 2010. And we'll be kicking today off with a quick presentation by Jon about his work. And after that, Jon's going to be answering some of the questions that you all kindly submitted via the survey. And time permitting, we will be having a live Q&A at the end for any other questions that come up during the session. But until then, again, try to keep your mic muted. That's going to be for another hour or so. And with that, I'll hand it off to Jon.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jordan. I'm really excited to be here. Really appreciate the invite. In 2020, MEDMA and MEMCO will be celebrating 15 years, which is really crazy to think about. Back in 2005, a year before I came to Michigan, the club started out as just a group of kids in Ann Arbor looking for carpools down to downtown Detroit for shows. So having this industry insights discussion and doing things like workshops and DJ lessons and events and panels and discussions is really amazing. It's really humbling, and I'm really proud to be involved. So with that, let's get started. So as Jordan mentioned, I am an agent. And in order to really dive into what an agent does, it's important to think about the industry roles in the booking process. By the way, my share screen's working right now, right? Before everybody can see it. Awesome. Cool. So I'm an agent. The agent is the artist representative. And when dealing with a negotiation, you're talking to the venue representative, which is the talent buyer. So normally the agent and the talent buyer are the two people doing the booking negotiation. Once that booking negotiation has occurred, it's time to promote the event. So promoters in the past have employed themselves and their street teams to market their events. And I'll show you guys some examples in this slide of my undergraduate days when I was doing that very thing. Going clockwise from the top left, that's MEDMA and Shea Magazine chalking in the diag. And then to the right is Relay for Life 2010. Below that is Festifall 2009. And then an unmarked football Saturday in the fall, I believe, of 2009, that last picture. So these are all very grassroots ways to market shows that still happen today. But within the last decade, there's been a lot of promoters asking for more artist-driven, geo-targeted promotion. And that's where the artist manager and or publicists get involved after the booking process and before the event occurs. So there's many more promotional channels that artists can now employ to help promote events. And these include, but are not limited to, video shout-outs, geo-targeted and demographic-targeted boosted posts, Instagram story takeovers, and so on. So here we have 4 different examples of that from my roster. Anna plugging a show in Switzerland, Guy J plugging a show in Argentina, Ardalan promoting a show with Mikey Lyon in Brooklyn, and then Anya Schneider promoting her whole entire October calendar last fall. So in addition to just having that relationship between the agent and the talent buyer, there's several electronic music initiatives that happen around the globe and also year-round as well. At the very top of that list is Amsterdam Dance Event, which is always the 3rd weekend of October in Amsterdam. That one's a big one. There's 400,000 fans, promoters, publicists, agents, talent buyers coming from all over the world, descending upon, I think, something like 1,200 ADE-sanctioned events. After that, there's International Music Summit in Ibiza, which is always Memorial Day weekend. I haven't actually been to IMS yet because, as we all know, there's another event Memorial Day weekend a little bit closer to home that is taking precedent, as we all know, movement in Detroit. And there's South by Southwest in Austin, Texas. That's normally in mid-March. And then the following weekend after that is Miami Music Week and Winter Music Conference, taking place, of course, in Miami alongside Ultra Music Festival. And then there's MUTEC. MUTEC is more kind of independent leaning and a lot more emphasis on gear and equipment and lighting and things along those lines. The flagship MUTEC event occurs in Montreal every year, and there's also MUTECs in Mexico City and even here in San Francisco. Then the last one on this list is not so much an electronic music initiative, it's more of a just music industry event in general, and that's Polestar Live, and that occurs and I think that rotates every single year. But these are events that happen year-round, more kind of big picture concept panels and discussions and events and lessons and things along those lines. But what does it look like every single day? What's the day-to-day approach to being an agent and working in an agency? So as an agent, I take care of strategic direction for all tours within our agency's jurisdiction, which is North America for almost all of our clients, South America for a majority of our clients, and then we have a smaller roster for Australia. I negotiate all the deal points for all performances, and I route all the tour dates. I'm also the head of AR for my roster, which is A&R, which stands for Artists and Repertoire. That's kind of a recruiting term that labels and agencies use. Then under me is my coordinator. Some different agencies call it assistant or a junior agent. At Liaison, we call them coordinators. This is the primary point of contact at the agency for all travel, logistics, press, and event advertising. This person approves the flyers and reconfirms the technical and hospitality riders. We'll get into what that means in a minute. Also assists with A&R. And then also the coordinator is a lead agency representative during visa applications and renewals. Now, United States visa applications can get very convoluted and complex and be very, take up all sorts of time. Coordinator normally spearheads that from the agency, along with other visas abroad as well. And then there's the accounts receivable accountant at the company. That's the person who sends out all the contracts and invoices, and also flags all the incoming payments that are coming in and marks them on QuickBooks or whatever accounting software you might have. And the accounts payable person is the one that pays artists their post-tour statements and also fields any management tax inquiries or anything along those lines. So this is just a basic example of how a booking works. There's normally an initial inquiry that comes from the promoter, but that doesn't necessarily always have to come from the promoter. If I have an artist that's about to release an album and we have this beautiful ad mat and PDF pitch about the tour, then I'll actually begin the inquiry from my side. After that, myself and the talent buyer have an initial negotiation. And then at that point, when the talent buyer is ready, they'll send me an email with a PDF that is a legally binding document that's called a formal offer. That offer basically opens up the hood of the event. It shows me every single expense that the artist or that the talent buyer incurs: security, venue rental, lighting, sound, backline. Sends me the monetary offer for my client. And then at that point, I'll say, hey, you know what? I realized that your ticket scaling was a little bit different than what we initially discussed. After looking at the formal offer, we'll actually have another back and forth round of secondary negotiation. Then once I feel like the negotiation is ready and the offer is in a pitchable configuration to the manager, then I will send that pitch to the manager of my client. The manager will then take it to the artist and say, these are all the deal points that our agent negotiated. What do we think? Sometimes after that, there's actually a third negotiation that occurs. I'll go back to the promoter and say, hey, you know, I didn't realize that my client would be traveling with the tour manager, or I didn't realize that my client would be checking a bunch of bags and bringing a lot of their own equipment, and there's going to be added labor and baggage fees and things along those lines. And then there'll actually be a third tertiary negotiation after that. Once the talent buyer, agent, artist, manager are all comfortable with the deal points, I'll issue a formal confirmation email. And I'll also signal to my accounts receivable person at the agency, all right, this is ready to go to contract. And then accounts receivable will generate a contract and invoice. And that is how it goes from inquiry to contract. Now let's talk about a couple types of offer types and deal points. Probably the most common type of offer in North America, at least, is a flat guarantee. That's just a monetary amount, regardless of how many people show up to the event. And then normal extras in the flat guarantee offer are hotels, ground transportation, which is airport, hotel, hotel club, club, hotel, hotel, airport, meal or dinner buyout, and then the artist rider, which we'll get to in a second. In territories where markets are a lot closer to one another, say in Western Europe, plus deals are very common. That means the agency's booking fee or commission, the flight for the artist, and the hotel, ground, and meal are on top. Like I said, it's more of a European style, but that does also happen occasionally in the Americas. Then after that, we have door deals. There's gross box office receipt and net box office receipt door deals. Remember, in those formal offers that are sent to me, all of those expenses are laid out: security, venue rental, lighting, sound, backline. Once all those things are paid for and you have the profit, which is the revenue minus all the expenses, that's your net box office receipts. And then a versus deal is going to be, actually, let's just use an example. We have a show that had 500 tickets sold at $20. So that's a $10,000 gross box office receipts. So if we have a flat guarantee offer of $7,000 versus 70% of your gross box office receipts, then those two offers are one and the same. You get the same thing. A versus deal is always going to favor which one of those two numbers is higher. So if you have $8,000 net box office receipts and your flat guarantee offer was $7,000, then the artist will walk away with $8,000. So before a show is confirmed, there's two very important parts of the deal that I sort out that don't involve any financial exchange, and that is riders and billing. So a rider, there's two different types of riders: a hospitality rider and a technical rider. A rider lays out everything that the artist needs in order to perform. Hospitality rider, things like food, snacks, alcohol, things along those lines. Technical would be the backline, which is all the equipment that the venue needs to provide from a technical perspective. That needs to be, some artists, DJs live, have a very vast array of expenses for riders, so that needs to be discussed at the time of negotiation. Same thing's true for billing. Billing is the way that an artist's name appears on a flyer. The placement, the size, whether or not they use a type font logo. I always use the example of the Coca-Cola script. That's a perfect example of a type font logo. Whether or not they're going to use the artist logo or whatever flyer font that the promoter wants to use, that's all sorted out before the contract hits ink. So let's look at some example riders. This is Technasia's technical rider. He is a DJ, and he uses an industry standard mixer, the Pioneer DJM 900 Nexus 2, and industry standard CDJs, which are Pioneer CDJ 2000 Nexus 2. So he's taking up all 4 channels on the mixer, and he also has, I believe that's an RMX 1000 as well. So this stage plot that we're looking at right now is the backline, the technical requirements that Technasia needs the venue to provide in order to perform. Now, that's not necessarily all musical equipment. For example, you see he's got 2 industrial size fans there. We've all been in DJ booths before, and we know how hot it can get. So he requires to have those 2 industrial fans in there, along with a stand for his laptop, because I believe he'll run Tractor or some kind of software through as well. What about live riders? On the left, we have Book of Shade's live setup, and on the right, we have Rodriguez Jr.'s live setup. So this is an array of different technical requirements that the venue will need to provide, backline, and in the case of both of these artists, actually, in the case of Book of Shade, it's a Zone 96 mixer, as you can see. And then with Rodriguez Jr., it's the Model 1 mixer. So mixers are almost always backline that a venue will need to provide. Same thing with keyboards. You're not seeing Book of Shade walk through the airport with giant keyboards. And that said, they do actually bring flight cases for their drums, which you see on the right. Rodriguez Jr. with the green icon there, and then his vocalist Lisette with the purple icon there. They also have a nice overhead view to the top right there, if you can see that. Monitors, also something that the venue provide. Backline. All right, now billing. I always use this flyer as a good example of billing because everybody's using their own type font logos, and there's 3 different tiers of profile. So the overall headliners for the festival, in this case Skrillex and Cascade, will be at the top with the largest fonts, and then in the tier 2 you have everybody listed in alphabetical order with their type font logos, and then tier 3. So when I get an offer, it'll say, all right, we're going to agree to alphabetical tier 2 billing for your client. If I don't think that's good enough, I'll negotiate, and then we'll work that out. What happens if a festival doesn't want to have all these billing arguments? And that happens a lot. Then in that case, all the artists will be listed alphabetically. And this is how Movement Festival did that in Detroit a couple years ago. So here we've got everybody, regardless of the size of their profile, listed A through Z by day. And we have some more examples of billing continued here. This is a club date. We've got Stefan Bodson with this type font logo, and then the local support is listed in whatever font the promoter preferred. And then we have Coachella from this year, which has 4 different size fonts for artists, having one overall headliner for each day. And Coachella is one where there's always a lot of billing arguments because it's not alphabetical order, you'll notice. There's definitely a lot of back and forth that happens between talent buyer and agent, and then Coachella is a great example of that. So how do you get started? I cannot stress enough how important it is to have that side of the coin that I listed in the first slide, the street team. The street team is an entry-level position, but it's absolutely vital to the entire booking process. The street team and local event support and promotion is critical. I think everybody should have to be a promoter and street team in order to do any of the jobs that I mentioned. I think in order to really fully grasp how important this task is, everybody should do it. I know that there's a lot of artists out there who have never been promoters, especially a lot of managers and things like that. You know, you can't really truly feel that compassion for the nitty-gritty details that go into throwing an event unless you're on the street team and promoting first. Then after that, graduating up to event production, this can be manifested in a lot of different ways. Some people enjoy, you know, being lighting or sound or stage managers, something along those lines. Or if you're on the more bookings front, doing talent buying. Being an event producer is a great way to get started as well. Then I also recommend, if you're a good writer or if you enjoy being a music critic, I highly suggest publications in our realm that would involve, but not limited to, Resident Advisor, Accelerator, Billboard Dance, Beat Portal, Dancing Astronaut. Those are all great publications and good ways to get started as well. And then another great way to get your foot in the door on the booking side of things would be having an internship in an agency or managerial company or with a public relations company. And that is a very rough sketch of what it's like to be an agent. And then I wanted to add this last one because it really grasps. We'll get a bit into what my job has been like in the COVID era, but I thought that this tweet had some MEMCO ethos. After quarantine, I ain't ever coming to late to a party again. Party start at 10. I'm there at 8:30 helping y'all set up. And that is all.
Word. Thank you, John.
So Menma.
Thank you so much. Word. All right. Well, thanks again for that dope presentation, John. I think we'll get right into some of the questions that y'all submitted via the survey. Firstly, one of the first ones we have lined up for you, John, is more specifically relating to your time at the University of Michigan. So they were curious what you majored in and how you think that applies to your job in being
Absolutely, it's a great question. So I'll start by saying that at the end of my freshman year, I applied to the Ross School of Business and did not get in. So anybody who's in the College of Literature, Science, and the Arts who is in the same boat as me, fear not. I ended up double majoring in economics and political science. And economics, I use econ every single day with almost every single decision that I make. Factoring payoffs and opportunity costs and quantifying utility and things like that. You know, this offer might be paying the most money, but it's not the coolest look for profiles. So I don't think this is going to be the best option in the market for my client. Or another scenario, you might have 2 really great offers for a weekend, but the problem is it's a 6-hour flight between the 2 shows, which in North America happens very often with you know, New York and LA or something along those lines. So I think about opportunity costs and payoffs and being able to quantify, you know, those qualitative circumstances and come up with what's going to be the best option for my client, and doing that legwork and then finally sending it to the manager and client when it's ready to confirm. Political science. So having a bachelor's level overview of comparative politics in different regions of the world really does help give me context when I negotiate shows. For example, last year, there were some protests over rising inequality and cost of living in Chile. And I had a couple clients going to Santiago for shows last fall. I guess that'd be spring for them. But it immediately reminded me of a class I took on South American comparative politics my junior year. And thinking about Chile's transition to democracy back in 1990. The parallels that I drew were that in my case, sending DJs to the country would be dramatically affected, and all trade in Chile was dramatically affected last fall. and I had to renegotiate a lot of my deal points. And in some cases, the artist couldn't even go there to travel because of safety, and also because the exchange rate plummeted. Almost 99% of our deals are contracted in United States dollars. So when there's a lot of volatility, politically speaking, in a lot of countries, that'll normally be reflected in their exchange rates as well. So I do use econ and poli-sci almost every day at my job, being an agent.
Word.
That was
All
a
right.
long answer.
Got you. And thanks again to everyone who submitted questions. All right. So the next one we have for you is, this one's a little bit longer. So it's kind of like a 3-part question. What would you say are the personality traits that lend themselves to being an agent? Why do you like being an agent? And do you have to move from place to place, or is it more the contrary?
That's a great question. To answer the last question first, it is an office job. So I am in the office 8 to 5 every day, doing the same exact thing, negotiating with everybody. So that's a bit monotonous. At the same time, that slide that I showed with all the electronic music initiatives, I get to travel the world. It's amazing. I love having South America in my jurisdiction. It's great that I speak Spanish. That's been a huge advantage against my competitors. And I go to Europe annually for Amsterdam Dance Event. So it's very cyclical. In the spring and in the fall, it's super busy. But in the summer, it's places like Europe that are outside of my jurisdiction it's very advantageous to tour there often. So the summer actually slows down for me. Same thing around the holidays, which kind of happens everywhere. But what are my personality traits for being an agent? Well, first and foremost, you have to love the music. I don't know too many agents out there who just consider this just another office job, nose to keyboard. It really is a labor of love. I also love solving puzzles. In this COVID era, there's a lot of issues. When things really started hitting the fan last month, I found myself in a rescheduling frenzy. But now that there's a lot more question marks up in the air as to how things are going to go and when these travel bans and things like that are going to loosen up, we had to get a little bit more creative, start thinking about maybe touring domestic artists first before these travel bans are lifted. Also, I love people. I consider myself the definition of a people person, very outgoing and gregarious, and that's a really important part of my job. Having a flexible demeanor and style to adjust to my audience and to make them feel comfortable. There's sometimes I'll get on the phone with promoters and I'll be, book the show, confirm the show. Hey, the weather's nice. Okay, great. Hang up. And then there's other promoters I'll get on the phone. Hey, what up, motherfucker? Let's book some gigs. So it's like you have to have a nice interaction and be able to be flexible. Some promoters will want to talk to you on the phone for 20 minutes about, turntable needles, and you just gotta, show your flair and demeanor on that front. And then other times, like I said, it's all business. So another thing about me is that I have a lot of energy and a very strong personality, but at the same time, if I'm doing something I love, I will have the discipline to sit there nose to keyboard for 10 hours a day and just do it. And that, like I said earlier, can get monotonous, but at the same time, if you're doing something you love, then it goes by a lot quicker and it's a lot more fulfilling.
Got it. Cool. The next question we got is a little more personal. It goes, "Hey John, I'm now in the SF area and planning to move into the city soon. Feeling a little bit lost, trying to make friends who are into electronic music that actually stick, and have no idea how to start spinning places since nobody knows who I am. Really missing the community feeling that MEMCO had. Any advice on how I can get started?"
That's a really great question. I think that this answer can apply to, this answer is different market by market, I would say. But what I will say first and foremost is, what type of impact do you want to have on your scene? Instead of just kind of looking at it like, it's difficult to make friends or it's difficult to start DJing places. When I first moved to Washington, D.C., when I worked for my first agency, I actually started this kind of concept called the private sector. And I know a lot of people on this phone call will remember that in the summer of 2010. I had a different person do the voiceover for letters A through Z. I did an hour-long mix, episode A, hour-long mix, episode B, for 26 weeks, because there's 26 letters in the alphabet. And that was the way for me to make friends and also give the decks over to other people and have them DJ, and building a rapport in that way. I think that if I do, in the COVID era now, if I were to just sit back here and DJ live and try to start something, there would be no collaboration or involvement. I think that collaboration is a vital part of being able to grow within your scene. I think that places like Washington, D.C., it's a little bit more exclusionary. I wouldn't call the DC region exclusionary by any means, but what I will say is that there are regional cultural differences. And when I moved to San Francisco and started working at Liaison, I realized that the scene is a lot more inclusionary. So ultimately what it comes down to is what do you want your involvement to be, and maintain that collaboration and attend people's events. Go out there, buy that ticket. Don't ask for guest lists. Buy the ticket, be there, dance your ass off. So that would be my best advice.
Word. Next one I got is, what do you think the next big genre will be to make the transition onto major US festival stages?
So right now there's kind of like two divergent styles of techno that are doing really well. There's that hard-hitting lethal techno sound, like 138, 140 BPM, that's doing well in Europe and starting to find its way onto a lot of festival stages in North America. And then on the other side of the techno umbrella, there's kind of that more Detroit-style breakbeat, electro, almost ghetto tech kind of sound that's kind of having another resurgence right now. I think we're going to continue to see that. I also am very, very curious to see how COVID is going to impact which genres gain and lose stock. I think that what we're going to see is it's going to be dependent on which artists are doing the most from their bedroom DJ setups. So yeah, that's how I'd approach that one with regard to music genres.
Word. This one is, to you, what is the most rewarding part of your career?
I don't think that there's anything more rewarding, first of all, than being that first agent to book somebody in Medicine Hat, Alberta, or Greenville, South Carolina, or London, Ontario, or Champaign, Illinois. It was really, really amazing that I was in the right place at the right time in 2007, 2008, when I got handed the keys to Necto and started doing really, really dope events. It was really awesome because we've all seen so many shows in Detroit, but the fact that Ann Arbor has had such an awesome scene, and I'll use this moment to plug Jordan's amazing documentary on the Ann Arbor music scene, Impulse. Phenomenal documentary. Everybody here should watch it. It's so awesome to bring music to young people, and especially in college towns. I use the example of London, Ontario, because that's where the University of Western Ontario is, which is like a 40,000 student giant college. There's a promoter there, NEC, and shout out to Jason Carpenter, who's doing really great events in London. And I had no idea that London, Ontario even existed until I became an agent. And then I eventually visited and saw just how incredible, there's all these 19, 20-year-old kids over there. It reminded me a lot of being in MEDMA in Ann Arbor. That's got to be the most rewarding. But there's also another thing that's super rewarding, and that is signing a client right at the very beginning of their career, and that the music's there, that the grit is there, that they're ready to tour, and you just throw all of your agency's weight and leverage around to get this person on events, and then you see them grow, and you see the momentum, and the hairs on the back of my neck are standing up right now even talking about that. So it's a very, very humbling and rewarding feeling to have an artist really start to hit the ground running and finally get those big festival offers, get them on Coachella and Movement and things like that. So that's probably the two most rewarding things of my job.
Cool. Next one I have is, in what ways have you seen parties, artists, and the music change as the scene shifts from being previously mostly underground and DIY to being more professional and capitalistic focused? What's the question?
So that's a great question. I would just say first and foremost, the music hasn't changed. The music itself doesn't change. It's the way that it manifests that changes. I personally, for one, think that it's exciting that more nationwide promoters have started buying shows. AEG Presents, Live Nation, Insomniac, Disco Donnie. There's a lot of underground folks who kind of shy away at that. And, one of MEDMA's very first slogans was "the scene is alive." And, whenever we'd have mass meetings, somebody would come up to me and say, "Hey, I'm really happy that MEDMA exists. I really love David Guetta." And, people who are in the club back then and people who are in the club now realize, oh, okay, well, in my head, I would think, yeah, that's not really the style of music that we do with EDM. But you just kind of have to look at them and say, that's amazing. I'm so happy that you're excited about it. Let us show you this sort of thing. So that's on a very micro level. Let's take that macro, let's take that inclusionary process macro. And so whenever I see, folks like Insomniac and Madison House, joining forces and throwing and taking the reins at Electric Forest and things like that, that excites me. I think that's a really good thing. And the reason that I got into electronic music is because like no genre of music and has ever given me as much just full on, immersive collaboration with everybody else on the dance floor. And I think that that's kind of a microcosm for where I want the scene to go. So yes, it is getting more corporate, but I don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing.
Got it. Cool. Next one I got is, do you have any like general music industry advice? Like what if, I'm interested in working in the music industry, but I'm not necessarily interested in working in an agency? I guess just like more general recommendations for the folks out there.
That's a great question. I knew from the get-go that I wanted to be involved in touring, just because, I really enjoy traveling and, being that puzzle solver, learning things about random intricacies like, Denver is a United hub and there's one red-eye flight. So if you're doing a day party in Denver, you can take a red-eye flight and end up in Cancun and play a sunrise set, in Cancun or in Tulum or something like that. That's a trait of being an agent. Some people just don't want to do that. Some people want to be a lot more creative. I will say I try to be as creative as I possibly can, but I think some of the best managers, not agents, managers out there are super creative and are coming up with really great concepts to pitch their artists. Some people are creative in that sense, in a business sense, but they're not necessarily creative in a music sense. So in that case, yeah, manager would be great. If you're a great writer, highly recommend going into publications or being in public relations. Some of the best writers I know are PR folks. So it definitely depends on your personality, and it also depends on what sort of work do you want to be doing 40, 50, 60, 70 hours a week.
Word. This one definitely has a little bit of overlap, but I think it's a really dope question. It's like a little bit of a two-parter. It goes like this. For me, it seems like most people that I know use production and music as a side gig, something they love, but they keep it separate from their career. Did you imagine yourself working in the music industry? And also, has it changed your perception and appreciation of music being in the industry in any good or bad way? Thanks.
So that's a great question. The only way that it's changed my approach to music is that sometimes I'll sit there at the height of the spring or the fall when things are crazy, and I'll say, "Wow, I haven't checked any promo emails in a long time. I just haven't had a chance." It's really important to maintain that return to the music, and I think that if there's one silver lining in everything that's going on right now with COVID, it's that there's been a return to the music. I've had a lot more time, I'm doing a lot less bookings now, obviously, and I'm spending a lot more time combing through promo emails and things like that. Remind me, what was the first part of that question again?
Yeah, so it was mostly about how like a lot of people tend to keep production and music as a side gig and separate from their career. Did you always imagine yourself working in the music industry?
So yeah, I actually didn't. Being an econ and poli-sci, I actually was considering the pre-law route. And it wasn't until I was 19, somewhere between sophomore and junior year, when I decided, you know what, I'm not going to be a swim coach this summer. I'm going to work for Necto as their marketing director. And I just thought, there are a lot of inefficiencies. When I started booking shows, regardless of the size profile of the artist, I realized there's a lot of inefficiencies in agency work and contracts and things like that. I want to figure out a way to kind of finesse this so that I can be an agent. And I actually called up a bunch of different agencies my junior year. And I will say the Bullet Agency in Washington, D.C., the first agency that I started working for, really took me under their wing and showed me, even before I got there, this is what agency work is like. And it wasn't until I was 19 when I decided, okay, this is what I want to do with my life.
Got it. This one I feel like you sort of touched on, but I'm sure you can elaborate on it. Do you ever run into language barrier issues, and is knowing a second language advantageous?
Yeah, I highly recommend it. I got much better at Spanish once I became an agent. And the reason for that is at orientation at Michigan, I actually tested out of Spanish. And when I was 17 in the summer before I came to Michigan, I was like, yes, that's one thing I don't have to do. And I highly regret that. Being able to speak Spanish now is a vital part of my job, and it's really important. And it definitely gives me a big advantage. There are still language barriers. You know, when I go to Amsterdam Dance Event every year, I'm talking to managers and artists from a lot of Western European countries, you know, where English is their second language. I also have gotten much better at picking up, when I'm on the phone with people and the sound quality is not as good. I just think I've kind of been classically conditioned to get better at figuring out language barriers country by country. But yeah, I mean, I actually, if I could do it all over again, I would actually learn German in addition to Spanish, because there's a lot of folks, you know, Germany and is such a huge hub for techno in particular, and there's a lot of artists who live there now. And there's artists that have lived in Germany for 15 years who still don't speak very much German. And if I spoke German, I think that would be a huge advantage as well. So yeah, there's definitely some language barriers, but ultimately you can get away with just speaking English. But like I said, much bigger advantage if you're bilingual or even trilingual.
Cool. Also, thank you everyone who's been like submitting questions throughout this. Feel free to keep using the survey, and also you can hold on to your question. We'll open the floor up to more of a live discussion in like a few minutes when I get through the rest of these. So up to you guys. But the next one we have is a little bit more about logistics. So how much time would you say does your job take? Is it about like 40 hours a week? When do you work in a day? Is it like a 9 to 5, or is it a bit less typical?
So being based in San Francisco, right when I moved here 7 years ago, I thought I'm going to feel like I'm so behind everybody. And I was right. I normally am in the office at 8 every day. And by that point, it's late morning on the East Coast. And, you know, the UK is 8 hours ahead of me. Germany and all the Central European time folks are 9 hours ahead of me. So I only have a window from about 8 a.m. to noon every day when I can interface with my clients and managers who are based in Europe. That said, it's not a 40-hour-a-week job. It's much more than that. Especially, and that doesn't change as you grow clout and leverage. But like I said, it's a labor of love, and you need to be ready to sign up for that. Being more than a 40-plus hour work week job, you also have to realize when you live in a cultural hub like San Francisco, you're gonna have clients in San Francisco 2 or 3 times a month. I mean, I have 21 artists on my roster now, and what is that? I mean, on average, there's 3-4 shows a month. A lot of artists play in San Francisco more than once a year. So in addition to the office side of the job, I'm going to shows a lot and dinners and things like that here in San Francisco as well.
Cool. The next one I got is what are some skills that one should learn or get in the habit of in prep for agency work?
That's a great question. Details, because you'll start out in the mailroom, or you'll start out as a logistics coordinator, and a lot of the time you'll be the one that's sitting there saying, okay, I'm compiling this itinerary for my client. This is United Flight 1463. And if you write United Flight 1467, you know, somebody's going to punch that in and check the status of the flight. And, you know, that's happened before, unfortunately, where, you know, we will send the wrong information on accident, and an artist will miss their flight or have to reschedule, and that's on the agency. So if we're taking care of their travel and logistics, of course, a lot of the time we'll only do their bookings, which will change our percentage commission. But being detail oriented is not just vital for a coordinator, it's vital for an agent too. When I was talking about billing and riders earlier, you know, I personally do hundreds and hundreds of bookings a year, and at any given day, I'm thinking about 3 dozen, 4 dozen different negotiations that are happening all at once. So if I forget to talk about billing, or I forget to talk about set times, or I forget to talk about, listen, this artist has a huge technical rider that you got to cover all their backline for, then that's going to come back to bite me later in the process when that contract's gone out and when the coordinator is advancing the show with the promoter. So the best thing I can say is be super detail oriented. And I think, you know, just having a liberal arts education in Michigan, you do learn a lot about processes and, you know, thinking critically and being able to, you know, do everything in the particular order of operations. So I would say being detail oriented is number one.
Cool. Now we have one, it's a little different. Do you have any advice for independent bookers when you have a talented artist but very few contacts?
Yeah. So by independent booker, I thought that you meant like an independent promoter, but if you mean like an independent agency with a client and not so many contacts,
I think I have a feeling that that's what they're.
Yeah, cool. So that's a good question. It comes back to kind of what you want your involvement in the scene to be. From a grassroots level, definitely showing up to events. And if the client isn't very big yet or hasn't kind of gotten out of that city, step one is to go to all these different venues with your client. Even if your client isn't DJing, just support other people. And then that way, that process will be reciprocal after a couple of visits and you've built a rapport with these promoters and things like that. Then once you get out of your own market, travel with your client or get on the phone with these people. And sometimes it's uncomfortable. You know, when I was getting started, it was uncomfortable going to places without my bosses, because I'd be kind of a sitting duck there on my own, just like a little you know, worker bee, just like, hi, I'm Jon Sax. We sent a couple emails. It's just like, okay, cool, all right. But you really got to get in there, get out of your comfort zone and talk to these people, build relationships with them. But, you know, you also, it talks about having that, I want to touch upon having that flexible demeanor as well. You don't want to overdo it, right? So it's a push and pull, and as you continue to grow, so will your finesse.
Cool. Next one I have is what has been the hardest part about being in the industry, in quotations, heart emoji. What are you excited for the future of dance music?
Honestly, I think this current era of COVID is probably the hardest thing that I've had to deal with in 10 years. And the reason for that is your heart just breaks for everybody, artists, managers, promoters, you know, agencies. And it's really difficult to look at the couple months ahead and realize that there's going to be 0 shows. But you also have to come at it at a place of compassion, because everybody's in the same exact boat. You know, it's not like a competitor came and swept up and took all my clients. It's everybody's in the same exact boat right now, and it's really important to keep your chin up, regardless of how much sun is hitting your chin. I'll go over a little bit here. And, you know, just take every single day one step at a time, because as we learn more about COVID and how it's going to develop and what that means for events, you know, we got to be ready. And one thing that I'm really excited about and looking forward to is the moment when we say, okay, you know, we got a vaccine, or we got, you know, certain antiviral medication that is available to everybody, and we can start doing events again. We're going to be ready to hit the ground running at Liaison. And so that, I think the most challenging thing so far has been COVID. But outside of that, I mean, it's always difficult when you go all the way to Movement Festival in Detroit and you've got your client playing for the very first time. Like the first time I had Anna playing, I think that was 2017. And then all of a sudden this massive rainstorm came down, wasn't even on the Doppler radar. And I don't know if anybody was there for this, but they had to have like the first 15 yards of the stage pushed out. And she's sitting there DJing to herself. And like, sure, there was a big crowd bunched up, but I was just looking out into the crowd and just saying, you know what? This is completely out of my control. There's nothing that I can do right now. But that's a really difficult part as well, is just having to deal with things that are completely out of your control. And that happens too on the fault of other people. I don't want to, you know, point my finger at any artist in particular or anything, but there's times that an artist will sleep through a flight, and because they're going to some really obscure place in the desert, that was the only flight that day, and they're going to miss the show over it. And it's completely not my fault whatsoever. So that happens all the time as well. So that's another soul crushing thing, is that, you know, there's a lot of things that are not in my control, but you just kind of have to sit there and take a deep breath and say, there's several hundred events going on this year, and this is just one event.
Cool. I have like another question that's a little bit COVID related, so I figured I'd ask it now. You were starting to talk about like the future, the way you see it, and I guess this question is just what's next for the electronic music industry in light of the virus? I guess what are you excited about? Any speculation you haven't shared yet?
So I definitely think the industry is going to get a lot more lean, and the real hardcore ticket movers are going to be getting back in the rotation. But also, so will these domestic artists that normally get pushed aside by these big international acts. Because with these travel bans in place, you've got to think that the first people to start touring again are going to be the domestic acts. I will say, like I said, there's that silver lining of people coming back to the music. And if there's one takeaway that I want everybody to have on this discussion, it's that the best thing that you can do right now is support the artists, because the artists are the ones right now, even more than agents or anybody like me freaking out, the artists are sitting there in the cockpit right now cooking up music. So what can we do to support them? Buy music on Beatport, buy music on Juno, buy some records on Discogs, buy some digital files on Bandcamp. Stream those songs on Spotify. That is the number one thing that I can recommend everybody in this discussion to do, because the artists are still going to be there right now cooking up beats, and we got to show our support now more than ever.
Right. Next one I got for you is, how does working in the music industry as a professional compare to involvement in the music scene as an individual? And has it changed the way that you perceive going out to a party, and how?
Yeah, it definitely has, for sure. I've been in the industry now for 10 years as an agent, but before that, when I was an undergrad, I was, doing marketing and talent buying at Necto. So I actually don't really know what it's like to not be in the industry and to be going out. But what I do know is that there's an immense amount of gratitude every single time I go out, and just being able to, shake hands and hug folks at the door and walk right in. That's one thing that I definitely don't take for granted at all. And then even in places, I still go to events like Sonar in Barcelona and different festivals in Germany and things like that, where I don't know anybody. And, you also don't want to be like, well, I'm Jon Sax from Liaison Artists, So I do feel like more of a consumer and less of an industry folk when I go to places that are very unfamiliar. And like I said, it's so humbling and just makes me really happy to be involved in the scene. But yeah, there's absolutely a difference. And in a lot of cases, I actually spent the summer of 2015 in Berlin, and I just remember thinking to myself that summer, I'm not going to hit up all my German partners for guest lists every single time I want to go out. I'm going to go out there and buy a ticket and support these events and promoters. And so I think that that was very humbling as well. Just going to these small clubs on Wednesday nights in Berlin, and these weeknight promoters that are really banking on everybody to support and buy a ticket.
Got two more, and then I guess we'll move to like a live session, if people are cool with that. But one I got here is, for folks trying to put together events for the first time, what advice can you give them about securing talent and navigating the world of agents, managers, etc., etc.?
That's a good question. So I would start out by saying, as an agent, if I get a cold call from somebody who I don't know, one of the built-in questions in a questionnaire I'll shoot over is, who have you booked in the last 6 months, and list the name of the artist, the agency that you worked with, and the date of the show and the venue. And if somebody comes back to me and says, I've actually never done a show before, it's very difficult to roll the dice. And I actually would move away from trying to do that. At the same time, everybody's got to get a start somewhere, right? You've got to start somewhere. And so what I did at Necto for the first time, I was really lucky that my predecessor, there was like 3 or 4 year break from Necto doing international DJ bookings, but my predecessor kind of had that name brand Necto recognition. And, Necto's been around for 40 plus years as the Necto Green Ballroom too. But if you don't have that luxury, then the best thing that you can do, like I said, is having some type of involvement in your scene. If you just come on, even if you have the deepest pockets ever, somebody in my vantage point, really taking care of and nurturing the look of every single show. I'm not going to book a show with you if you're a first-time promoter and you don't have any industry experience. That show's just not going to happen, regardless of if you want to send me the highest offer possible. So if you're just getting your foot in the door, before you send that offer to an agency, I would say start out as a street teamer. Start out flyering, start out chalking, start out doing handbills and things like that. Once you build that relationship with the promoter that you're working for, then when it's time to send that offer to an agent, that agent's going to do a reference check. I do reference checks all the time. I'll say to my coordinator, hey, do some research on this guy. And then my coordinator will come back and say, this guy's actually never done events before. Or they'll say, I did a reference check and Paxahau gave this promoter good references. They said he's a good street teamer. Does Paxahau want to book the show? I just checked with Chuck. No, he doesn't want to book the show. Is Chuck okay with me booking the show with this newcomer? Okay, let me check. Yeah, he's okay. All right, well, let's give it a shot then. And then I'll just, and I'll be very strict. I need the flyer for approval. I need an immediate deposit. And then, if it makes sense for the client and makes sense for the market, then we'll really hold their hand through the first time booking.
Cool. I have a kind of offshoot question for that. You said that references hold a lot of weight, but what about maybe people who have been, deeply entrenched in like the underground scene in their respective city, and the majority of their experience has been, not with working with promoters at all, but booking local talent, and selling out, like, throwing like packed raves that don't necessarily get as much coverage or don't necessarily have like a popping off resident advisor page. To what extent does like that sort of portfolio pull any weight when they come to you, an agency, for the first time and say, no, I've never worked with an agency, but I have booked like X amount of shows in my city that have went off?
Well, in that case, I would say media. If these events are as dope as everybody's saying that they are, then I'm sure that there's pictures and videos and things like that. If you have a scenario like U Street Music Hall or Output, these venues, whether open or closed now, wouldn't allow photography, then there's got to be somebody in the scene. If you're in a market where people are routinely touring, there's got to be somebody in the scene who knows of these events. Oh yeah, so-and-so's events are incredible. They've only done locals so far, but there's going to be somebody in most major markets who at least has a relationship with these grassroots promoters. And with Liaison's web of contacts, we will eventually get to that person that does have that relationship with us, and then they'll give us the real lowdown.
Cool. The last submitted question I have here is, do you see the role of student groups like MEMCO changing or staying the same in the future in terms of electronic music events? So I'm curious.
I have a dream panel at Amsterdam Dance Event called The Role of Universities in Electronic Music. I was going to submit it to them this year again. It hasn't happened yet, but that's a great question. And here's my answer. MEMCO has, I believe we're in May's pages. We're an official student group, and that's great. But there's other student groups. For example, when my brother was on program council at the University of Colorado, that was so much closer to like almost an internship in bookings, because a lot of the time they'd actually use university funds to book shows, of course, with the approval of whichever university talent buyer is in there. Now, I know Michigan has venues like Hill Auditorium and the Power Center, places that are university owned, so to speak, Mendelssohn Theater, places like that, where I'm sure that there are in-house buyers at Michigan taking care of that. Do I see the role of MEMCO changing? I love the role that MEMCO is currently taking right now, but at the same time, what I would love to see is having MEMCO take the reins somehow in bigger event bookings at places like the Power Center, or even the Ann Arbor Summer Festival, or something else. Jordan, you mentioned that you were playing, was it the film festival?
Yeah, but it was like we're like a community partner thing. It's not really a dance music event.
Yeah, but to answer the question, I think that it would be really cool if, and this would involve, having MEMCO folks that would be interested in being in more of that buyer side of the coin task as an undergrad. So, I mean, what MEMCO is doing right now and what it's evolved to is absolutely incredible, and keep up the incredible work. But what I will say is, it would be really dope if we somehow started some kind of collaboration with the university and we were able to use university funds in order to bring in some really, really big, exciting events to Ann Arbor.
Word. Well said. Again, thanks to everyone who submitted questions. And I think if y'all want to open your mics, and I guess just like whoever talks first should ask a question. I have a few questions if we remain awkwardly silent for too long, but I'm gonna shut up for a second.
I have one if no one else has one.
Yeah.
I'm kind of hey John, thanks for coming out, so to speak. But I was wondering, like, since you were an active part of MEDMA and now you're an agent, like, what are some similar, and it could be anything, like, what are some similar things you see, or similar things you do, or similar things that happen between like the MEMCO scene and just the scene in general?
I would say A&R first and foremost. Like, there's been times when, hey, liaison colleagues, I've been seeing his name a lot more recently. Like, what do you guys think? They're kind of buzzy, right? And we did that all the time in MEDMA. We were just like, yeah, I mean, should I think about getting Necto to book this person? I keep seeing their name a lot more. I feel like, it'd be a good investment for Necto, and it'd be a cool for MEDMA. So that's one thing is A&R. That I still use that for sure. I'm trying to think. I mean, I'm not a promoter anymore, and I feel like my role in MEDMA was like making sure to get people to events as much as possible. And that doesn't even necessarily need to be at clubs either. All the house parties and cooperatives and frats and stuff where we used to throw events. From a smaller micro perspective, for shows that are in San Francisco, I do kind of do a loop with all my friends. Hey, do you guys want to come out to my show? Let me know. So I would say that those are two parallels.
Cool, thanks.
Word.
Thanks, Miguel. Any other questions, y'all?
John, thanks again for putting this together. Excellent, as always. I wanted to see if you could touch on a little bit more on typefaces, flyers, and billing, because there's a certain person here that I think wants to learn more about that.
Okay, yeah, totally. Well, it's case by case, and I will say it's interesting because you have to think about why is the promoter making this decision. So in the first flyer example that I showed you guys, here, I can go back to it in a second here. Let's see. Going through the presentation here. So in the first example, they actually have a bunch of type font logos that are tiered. And I actually like that a lot, even though it involves a lot more of my work. I like that because what it does is it moves tickets, right? So if you have Skrillex and Cascade, this is the flyer that I'm referring to, if everybody can see. If you have this flyer that, as a promoter, you're trying to move as many tickets as possible. So if you have a flyer like this, it's great, all the folks that are kind of in that periphery where it's like, I'm not sure whether or not I want to go to the festival. It's really loud here that these folks are headlining, right? And that's why, and type font logos are important because of that brand recognition, I don't know the neural pathways that are triggered when you see a certain type font logo, but it's definitely a much quicker pathway than if you just see everybody listed in alphabetical order, like the movement flyer on the right. Sure, it saves a lot of billing arguments and headaches to do the right. And also, it sometimes for me, I get to exhale. Okay, cool. I don't have to, put on the boxing gloves and get on the phone with my competitors and fight for billing position. So yeah, I mean, these are two very, very different ways to promote the show, and I like them both for very different reasons. So does that answer your question, Kevin, or is there anything else you want me to touch on?
I think that more or less covers it. I think the question sort of goes to this idea of, like, should events, art goes with music so much, and it seems like it's going more and more in that direction, that I wonder if you can speak to the idea of, an identity of an event versus identity of an artist, sort of distinguishing, like, you can see events where a whole tour will basically have the same stock flyer versus, like, I don't know, a good example might be like Berghain, where their marketing is strictly for them. It doesn't really matter who the artist is.
Yeah, that's actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because that slide that I showed about the booking process, that initial inquiry, sometimes I'll be like, hey guys, right now we're booking Mikey Lyons' album tour. And here's the ad mat. What you're referring to when every single show has the same exact flyer across the tour, that's normally called an ad mat. And the agency will send the promoter the different fonts that they need. They'll send them, you know, and they'll just say, hey promoter, plaster that Necto cube into the corner of your flyer, and then put on your date and put on your local support. And then that'll be the branding for the show. But then Berghain, for example, they don't use any type font logos ever. They just say, you know, Club Knocked. Here's the rundown. That's the way it's going to go. And I think that that is a nod to the venue and the allure of the event itself, and less the allure of the artist. So, you know, I know Flash nightclub in Washington, D.C. is the same way. They never do type font logos. Same with Sound nightclub in Los Angeles and Hollywood. They never do type font logos either. And I think that the reason for that is, you know, they want to, this is our aesthetic, okay? And we have the artist coming in to our house, you know? And I think that kind of, you know, is achieved nicely, but without the usage of type font logos. So I hope that answers the question.
I have a question, if I can.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the difficulties or maybe some of the surprising benefits of booking multi-person acts versus like a singular DJ?
That's a great question. I think a lot of the reason that DJs have these flat guarantee offers is because the expenses behind sending one DJ with their headphones and their USB is different than sending an entire band. And that's why you don't really see very many bus tours for DJs. A lot of DJs are flying around and they're a lot more nimble when it comes to touring. There's a lot of headaches that arise from more people touring, but at the same time, as there's a direct relationship between the level profile of an artist and whether or not they can bring a tour manager, whether or not they can bring a lighting director or something along those lines. As complex as those bookings get before the ink hits paper, it also is extremely exciting to be involved in a booking like that, because you're normally talking about a much bigger venue, you know, much bigger reach and exposure. But yeah, it does get to be very complex. But I also think that as these bigger artists tour and tour more, it's more of a well-oiled machine, and there's less headaches that arise post-booking.
Any other questions, y'all? We can wait awkwardly again.
I think if there's nothing else, we got to get a rundown from Sax on his current top 10, because Sax is well known for his top 10s.
Yeah, so I normally do top 10s of things that are not music related, like my top 10 sports movies. I think it'd be a bit of a conflict of interest to go through my top 10 like artists or venues or anything like that. I will also say that it changes dramatically. But one thing that I will say that I've been really into recently, I don't know what happened, but once the calendar year turned over, actually I can know exactly what happened. I got a flat tire, and I was riding my bike, I got a flat, and I went into one of my favorite bicycle shops in San Francisco, shout out to Huckleberry on Market, and they were playing synthwave, the genre. And I was like, this is incredible. I always knew of synthwave, but I didn't know about these certain tracks. And so I was sitting there awkwardly, like as they were changing my tube, I was sitting there like Shazamming every single song. And the guy looks over to me and he's like, yeah, we play a lot of synthwave in this house. And I'm like, I love it. So this entire calendar year so far, I've been really into synthwave, and I've just like really dove into it. You know, I don't have any synthwave artists on my roster, and I don't plan on getting into that lane professionally. But I will say, you know, it's definitely very buzzy for me right now. So that said, if anybody has any synthwave recommendations, I've already asked Facebook before a couple months ago, but you know, shoot them my way.
Any other questions, y'all?
Yes.
I guess Oh, my bad. You got it.
Hi, John.
Hey, Sam.
I'm one of MEMCO's photographers, videographers. We've gotten a lot of cool media and a lot of cool experience doing media for MEMCO. And I'm kind of just wondering if are there jobs and what are they for photographers, videographers, and is it also graphic design? Just like what's that look like?
Absolutely. There's a huge industry for that. There's an absolutely huge industry for that. I will say it's almost entirely regional. You wouldn't think so because, you just kind of need everything. You need your computer here in your cockpit in your room and just, fire out flyers. And a lot of people do that. I will say for these bigger companies like AEG Presents and Live Nation and Insomniac and Disco Donnie, they have in-house graphic designers. And that is a very, very, very important and competitive industry. But on a more micro sense, there's a lot of these clubs and promoters. I just thinking about like As You Like It in San Francisco and Set in San Francisco. And there's just a couple of different companies, Deep Blue, people like that in San Francisco. They all have their own graphic designers. Same thing's true with photographers too. There are photographers in Southern California who do all of the all the festivals and things like that. And then there's also people market by market who go to shows and photograph for venues. So I would say if you're a up and coming photographer, my best advice would be go to individual events within your market and photograph as long as the clubs allow that, as long as the festivals allow that. And then after that, just show your work off to people. It's not as common to have like a touring photographer with an artist. A lot of the time, the role of a tour manager will be to make media on the road during the performance, in addition to setting up and breaking down and collecting the dinner buyout and doing all those things that tour managers do. But professional photographers, definitely a very critical part of our industry that is important in every single market. And like I said, it's more of a regional thing as opposed to somebody going on tour, at least from the ground up, in the first couple tiers of profile.
Thank you.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, yeah, I just want to say one more time, thank you guys so much for having me. This industry insights discussion is amazing, and it's just another part of what makes MEMCO so great. And I'm really honored to be doing the inaugural one, and I'm looking forward to participating in the rest. Like I said, if there's anything you guys want to do to help support the music industry right now, buy music. Just support the artists. They're the ones who can still fire on all cylinders right now. And until folks like myself can really get back out there and putting them in front of the best crowds and venues around the Americas and Australia, let's all do our best to pitch in and support.
Thank you so much, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank y'all for tuning in. I hope y'all are staying safe and healthy. Catch our MEMCO live stream tomorrow. We're doing a virtual impulse, and we're encouraging people to donate to the GoFundMe of Club Above, which has been the home of MEMCO over the past 2 years, trying to just get the people who work there their wages that they would have gotten if we had our party in March happen. So tune in, and thanks again for coming out, y'all. And thank you again, John.
Thank you.
Jordan, can I ask one last question, or is that?
Yeah,
That's up to John. That's not up to me.
Yeah. Sure, go ahead.
Hi, John. Just thanks for talking with us. I really do appreciate it.
Of course.
I don't know if you covered this earlier in the presentation. I kind of joined a little late. But,
Sure.
When you have your agency, do artists come to you to come be a part of your agency, or are you out looking for a particular artist? And if so, what are you looking for in a particular artist when you're trying to add them to your roster?
Yeah, you know what, Kyle? Believe it or not, we haven't touched on that yet, and I should have done that in the presentation. That's a great question. So by the time an artist is at a point where they need an agency, they should be having so many inquiries come in where they can't do all the work themselves, or their manager can't do all the work themselves. By the time they're coming to Liaison, they've either had another agency before, and for whatever reason they want to make a change, or they're super buzzy at the moment and we see a lot of potential. So sometimes they'll actually approach us and say, hey, I can't really do all this work by myself anymore, I need an agency. Or other times with major headliners, they'll say, hey, John, I really appreciate the work that you're doing for this artist, and I think that I should be playing in those same clubs and festivals that this artist is doing. I'd like to make a change and start working with you. So those are two different ways that we deal with A&R. But other times, like I said, very similar to when I was in MEDMA, I'll just look over my friends and say, hey, this artist seems like they'd be a really good booking for us. And the same thing can be applied towards an agency too. Hey, I feel like this artist is very creatively aligned with our roster, and I feel like I could put them in the right clubs and festivals. So yeah, that's normally how we approach A&R.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Kyle. All right, thanks again.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I have a question. You already touched on this, but
yeah.
How often do you book independent artists? And if so, like how is it different or encouraged through Liaison? Like someone who like doesn't have a promoter, but like is there just like fully independent?
Yeah, so by the time you're on the Liaison roster, there's like a big onboarding process. Like we'll get you on the website, we get your tax documents and things like that. It doesn't happen very often that we'll do piecemeal bookings for an artist. When that does happen, it's normally like, hey, we've got this touring entity like Desert Hearts, for example, one of my clients, and they've got somebody who doesn't have an agency, but we want them to tour with us for a couple weekends because they're perfect support based on what we're playing at the moment. Then in that case, we will actually contract some shows with them. It's very case by case. But that doesn't happen too often. But by that point, normally you'll get good enough exposure where you will need to be in a position where you do need some actual formal representation. But normally it's like you're either on board with us or you're with a different agency or independent.
Right. Cool. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
I got one.
Hey, Danny.
Hey, John. So for somebody who's just getting started, can you help share the path of what it was like? So the jump from going from street team to signing with Harlan, Technasia, and Mikey Lyon, like it happened? How did it just like help us look under the hood in terms of how that process, the rocket ship sort of started?
So you cut out a little bit. You're saying going from street team to which level?
Just signing Mikey Lyon and Technasia, Arlen, like.
Yes.
Yeah.
So by the time I was an agent and kind of having that snowball effect of having artists talk about my work and things like that, street team obviously first, and then getting into event production, being successful throwing events. One really invaluable thing that I did that I mentioned earlier was an agency internship. That was really helpful. And then working as a coordinator at a booking agency. So once you're sitting there grinding as a booking coordinator and you've made that step up from coordinator to agent, once you've made agent, then at that point, it's just being able to just wheel and deal the best shows possible, making sure that you're dealing with artists who are willing and able to tour hard and be super professional, which in our industry can be very volatile. And there can be a wide array of people who, kind of touring can kind of get caught up with them a little bit, so to speak. But once you're at a point where you're starting to sign bigger clients at an agency, it's normally because artists are talking to other artists and managers are talking to other managers about your work. And that's actually another reason I'll mention. That's actually another reason why it's so important to not have too many artists on your roster, because everybody has a threshold. You can't, I've made the mistake before within the last 10 years where I've had too many artists on my roster and I can't give every single artist the same amount of tender love and care and attention. And, sometimes your eyes can be bigger than your stomach and you really got to be careful. And, you're going to be doing a lot more work for domestic artists than you are for internationally touring artists who are only coming into your jurisdiction a couple weekends a year. So yeah, to answer your question, I would just say don't bite off more than you can chew, and make sure that you're doing quality work for everybody on your roster.
Cool. Nice.
Thank you.
Ooh.
All right.
You gotta say it. You gotta say it, John. We can't finish this without you saying it.
Okay. Shall the means of electronic music forever be encouraged? Cheers. I'm surprised I haven't said that yet. For those who don't know, that's the MEDMA. Back in 2007, when I was making MEDMA a formal club at the University of Michigan, Maze Pages was like, we need you to have a slogan. And I'm like, oh man, I don't know what to do. So I thought about the final line on Mason Hall that's etched into the bottom of the Mason Hall kind of mission statement for the university, and that is, and shall the means of education forever be encouraged. So I just thought, obviously, shall the means of electronic music forever be encouraged. So I'll drink my coffee to that. It's still only 3:21 on the West Coast, so I can still drink coffee.
We got to bring that back, I guess.
Yeah, for
That went
sure.
over my head. All right. Thanks so much again, John.
Thank you, Jordan.
Yeah, thank
Looking
you
forward-
everyone for coming through.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much. Hang in there.
Cheers, mate.